I'm ready to puzzle you, Tyler.
Okay. All right. So before we get into the actual lists of this segment, I want to say we came up with our list independently. I don't think there's going to be any overlap, but I went with a pretty loose interpretation of puzzle game for the sake of including things that I was very familiar with and very experienced with. I haven't played a ton of just random puzzle games over the years. And everything that's on my list, I sort of didn't tell you the game itself, but kind of gave you similar games or similar styles of game to make sure we were on the same page. You were pretty much on board with my mindset. So this is going to be games that are heavily puzzle elements, games that consist of puzzles, but they're not all going to be, 2D sort of arcade type experiences like you would primarily think of right off the top with puzzle games. So that's what I want to preface my list with before we get into anything else.
I just want to preface my list by saying that I was a bit of a purist on this one.
Mm-hmm.
All of my titles are literally puzzle games on platforms. We do have a shared honorable mention that we'll get into. That is, it's number one on the puzzle topic, no question.
Correct. Yeah, we can just get straight into that. Whenever you're ready.
That's Tetris.
Yeah.
An
iteration.
Unspoken champion of puzzle games. In my mind,
probably the greatest puzzle game ever designed.
Definitely. First game I ever played, I talk about it all the time, on the DMG. Tetris on NES, still one of my favorite NES games. Tetris DS, so near and dear to our hearts.
That could have been on my list just separate.
Absolutely. Just Tetris DS, yeah.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
That is still one of my favorite DS games. And, we had to combine Tetris. It just had to be done because otherwise it would have been, number one for both of us probably.
Well, let me hear about your number 5, Sterling.
Well, for my number 5, I'm actually going to throw out Mario's Super Picross on the Super Famicom.
Okay.
Now, I spoke recently about, maybe not too recently, but in the past, I got into Picross. The company Jupiter that actually did Mario Super Picross, they make Picross S games on the Switch. I picked up Picross S2 and really got into Picross. And then, what do you know? Super Nintendo Online gives us Mario Super Picross.
Yep.
And without even being able to read it, because it's a Japanese game, I still found this to be my favorite Picross experience next to the Picross S games on Switch. Because of Mario. That's the only word you need to say. It's the definitive Picross experience, and it's got Mario attached to it.
Yep.
So that was an easy pick for me when we talk puzzles, man. Picross is really fun once you get into it and you comprehend it. It really gets to be a lot of fun.
Definitely.
And it only gets more fun when Mario's in the mix, man. Definitely check out the Picross S games on Switch. Jupiter, still going strong, making Picross games. Big shout out to them.
Absolutely. My number 5 is a game that we've talked about at length on this podcast. And it's a game that I took a bit of a break from, but I have actually recently got back into, and I'm very excited to continue playing it. And that's Luigi's Mansion 3. This game, the puzzle elements are undeniable, right? Like, this is basically an exploration, seek and find game where every room is its own puzzle, unless it's combat related. But even the combat is generally a puzzle to figure out as well. So I honestly think that, like, this game, not having played too much of the originals, like, it's a definitive game of its kind, just because of the amount of different puzzles and just stuff there is to do in the game. What do you think, Sterling?
I think it's a great pick. I think it's a sneaky pick because I would have put something like that on my list if I considered it a puzzle game for sure. But
I don't see how it wouldn't be though.
well, maybe I'm thinking of it from a single screen puzzle game perspective.
Definitely, I think you are.
But hey, I mean, it's a great pick. You're right. The puzzle elements, the game is a series of puzzles. I mean, every floor of the hotel is a puzzle. Every room, or most rooms, are a puzzle.
Yeah.
Bosses are meant to be figured out. You know, they're touchy feely. Figure out what the mechanics are.
But we love Luigi's Mansion.
We love Luigi's Mansion. One day we're gonna chuck up the money. We're gonna move in, you and the girls, into Luigi's Mansion.
Oh. One day. Which one?
Yeah. We could move
hotel?
into yeah, maybe the hotel. The original's a little bit too vacant, bro. But we could always go to that Dave and Buster's Luigi's Mansion arcade game. Me and my girl kind of lived in there for a little bit.
Hey.
That was pretty cool, man. I think you would have loved that, actually.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
You get to hold the vacuums and
Oh yeah, I've seen that, but I've never done it.
oh, it's so fun.
But yeah, man, that's my number 5. Let's hear about your number 4.
My number 4, I love getting to talk about NES games. And today I'm going to be talking about Adventures of Lolo.
Okay.
Adventures of Lolo, you control a cute little ball character. He's a bit like Kirby, but, you know, maybe not as cutesy. He's a little more on the, you know, serious side. If you know him, you know him. If you don't, check him out. But Adventures of Lolo is a puzzle game. At any given time, you're on a single screen. And basically what you're doing is you're moving stones around, navigating. It's kind of like a Zelda room, you know, like if you were in a Zelda dungeon. And each puzzle is a screen. You move from screen to screen. And the main objective is basically to, you know, you push stones around, you trigger items to open the next way, and you're avoiding enemy attacks. Now, there's a lot of thought that goes into which path to take to avoid this projectile attack. You have an enemy that's running a certain pattern. You have to avoid going within that pattern. It's a pretty adventurous, pretty hands-on puzzle game. So anyone who owns an NES or has any interest in emulating NES, Adventures of Lolo, great puzzle game.
Hey, perfect. Well, my number 4 is really off the beaten path. This is not a game that was ever on a console. It's a game that only existed on the internet in browser/flash format. And I'm going to have to give a little backstory here, but just bear with me. And this is a game I think I may have told you about years ago when I first discovered it, but not since then. But when I think of puzzles and games, like, this is the most interesting one to me that possibly has ever been made. It's a French game called Overture Facile. Now, what this game is it's a series of browser-based puzzles where you actually have to solve the puzzle that's in front of you using any tools that could possibly exist on a computer, whether that be a photo editor like GIMP, an audio editor like Audacity. This game is where I figured out or sort of learned about Audacity and GIMP in the first place. And you go sequentially, and each level is a different puzzle, and you have to go through sequentially and solve them. And it starts off as simple as, you know, type in a code word, and there's numbers on it's a picture of a bunch of, you know, athletes, and they have different numbers on their jerseys, and you have to match those numbers up with something from a cell phone and, like, T9 style, translate that into a word. And that's what gets you to the next level. But there's ascending difficulties, and it goes up into the hundreds. And I never made it past maybe 10 or 20 as a kid, but I would love to go back and give it a try. But if you ever have any time on a browser, you want something that's going to stimulate your brain, make you learn how to use some basic tools on a computer, Overture Facile it's a French design game, but they have the site in most major languages and everything. It translates over, so couldn't recommend that more. It's basically the equivalent of a Flash game, so it does seem a little strange on this list, but it's such a unique puzzle game experience. I had to include it.
Sounds very intriguing, man. I'm
Yeah.
actually interested in checking that out. It sounds a lot more complex than you would think whenever you talk about anything in the neighborhood of a Flash game. You know what I mean?
It's way more complex. It involves, I mean, you don't, there's no time limit on it. You just get to the page and you have to figure it out. And when you figure it out, you get the next page.
Well, I'm looking forward to checking that out, man. That's I don't even know the game, but I know it's a great pick because it sounds great.
Yeah, I'll send it over to you and we can go through it at some point.
My number 3 is available on the Switch and is recommended to all, and that is a game called Baba Is You.
I've heard a lot about this game, but I've never played it.
This is one of the games that I can say that my girl put me on to.
Yeah.
The game, its representation is very cute. It's got a pixely art style, which you already know. I mean, this type of art style is what draws me into anything.
Mm-hmm.
So my girl picked it up, and she was really into it, really grinding this game, getting off of work and really sticking on it,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm watching her play it, and I was like, this is magical. This whole experience, just the music, it almost sounds like the whole time you're just underwater listening to a beautiful, like, 8-bit symphony. It's just so soft,
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to pick it up for myself. And when I did, I realized, like, not only is the presentation of this absolutely incredible, but the actual premise of it is one of the best puzzle games. It's more than you can ask for.
Yeah.
Basically, the game is called Baba Is You, but you're matching up phrases. This is that. So just, to make it simple, like if you have a rock in your way, rocks, something surrounding your key, like there's always a point you need to get to on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
If you can slide tiles to make it say Baba is rock, then suddenly you'll be controlling the rock.
Oh, okay.
Then you can move that rock, for example. Baba could be switched back to you by moving the U tile over, and then you just walk to the finish as Baba.
That's pretty interesting.
It gets way more complex than you can even fathom. The difficulty in the game amps up, and it really requires a lot of thought.
As any good puzzle game should.
Definitely. And so this is, when we talk about making a puzzle games list, this was definitely one of the first thoughts in my mind to throw on it.
Perfect.
But I would love to hear your number 2, man. We're getting down to the wire.
This is my number 3, but it's one that's so obvious that I feel like it's got to be on the list, and it's probably the most recent game on either of our lists. Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania.
I considered that for the list too, my brother.
That game has provided me so many hours of enjoyment and frustration. I'm still making my way through the actual main game content, but I have been playing it quite a bit. It's a regular rotation into my Switch for sure.
Definitely. That's definitely one of my active library games.
Yep. So not a whole lot to say because we've kind of talked a lot about this game already, but Banana Mania, if you love this kind of like puzzle platformer, pick it up. It's the definitive monkey ball experience from everything I can tell.
No question. I think I really wanted to talk about old games, which I don't get to do as much.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that fact, man, Banana Mania would have been on the list. I'm really glad you picked it. And it was a big thought. But rolling into my number 2, man, it's actually an NES game. One of the last NES games I actually picked up before I kind of chilled on collecting until Journey to Silius, that is. And it's a game called Palamedes.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't seem to be a very known about game, but basically you are controlling, a little guy at the bottom of the screen, and you have a die, like a dice. Now, you can hit a button and switch whatever number's on that dice. You can change it to any number you'd like. And you basically are emptying the screen by making suits of dice, whether it be 1 through 6, matching up pairs, that type of thing. But this might sound very basic in concept, to say, oh, yeah, you're playing as a guy and you're chucking dice upward. But I think if you played it, you'd understand the charm and how good it feels to sit there and just kind of, as the screen's slowly kind of moving down, as these games do, there's a little bit of pressure there, but you're thinking. You have the option to use any number on your dice, and you're just finding ways, just finding which line to clear, where you can make 1 to 6, where you can, such an aesthetically pleasing game with incredible gameplay. One of the best titles on the NES.
Yeah, definitely, man. I'll have to check that out.
I don't think there'd ever be another opportunity for me to talk about Palamidi, so I'm glad we did today. Shit.
It's our podcast, man. We can find reasons to talk about any game you want.
NES just doesn't come up too often. I don't want to be selfish with the NES,
In the future, we'll definitely get back more into it. My number 2 is yet another puzzle platformer. It's another favorite of the podcast and a game that we've talked about at length, Celeste.
That's so crazy, man, because I thought to myself, if it's more of an action game, right? But I agree. And Celeste was a big thought on the list. You always bring up the ones that I think about.
Yeah. It feels like a puzzle game to me. Like I said, a game that can be more than one genre, and I think this is a great example.
Yeah, I was a bit of a purist today, I'll admit.
That's fair. I mean, we brought our list from completely different directions, which I think is what we want.
Yeah, we want to cover more games. I mean, Celeste is always worth covering. What a fantastic game.
To me, it fits perfectly on this list just because it does have that element where not every single screen is a puzzle, but many of them are. And many of the parts of the game that make the game what it is are complex puzzles, right?
No question.
So yeah, highly recommend Celeste. It's a challenging game. If you feel like you've got pretty good dexterity, pick it up. I mean, it feels great to play on the Switch, handheld or on a Pro Controller. No question.
No question. I'm not going to argue with you, bro. I'm loving it.
But it's time for your number 1, Sterling.
It's time for my number 1, and this is what puzzle games are made of. This is the crowned champion next to Tetris, forever in my mind, and that is Wario's Woods.
Yep.
And that goes for the NES and the Super Nintendo renditions. I grew up with the Super Nintendo version. Luckily, my grandpa secured that somehow for me very early on into owning a Super Nintendo. And I absolutely loved it as a kid. I can't tell you how much time I poured into it. Later in life, I got into NES collecting, years and years ago. And when I realized that Wario's Woods was also on the NES, as a collector and a fan of the game, you knew I had to get it. Mm-hmm. So I got it, and I found a whole new charm to it on the NES, because I think I mentioned before, if I'm not mistaken, this is the last NES game that was produced. So we're talking late cycle. That it came out pretty right next to the Super Nintendo version.
It's always these puzzle games too, because while I was researching this topic, I realized that Dr. Mario was definitely one of the last GameCube games produced. Or sorry, one of the last N64. Dr. Mario 64 was one of the last N64 games ever produced.
That's interesting. And Dr. Mario may not have made my list, but I will tell you, I love Dr. Mario. Mm-hmm.
It's something I was considering as well. I don't have as much time in the game to speak authoritatively on it, though.
Definitely, I would agree. It's one I've played from time to time across so many iterations, and I've always enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. But this is what it is, Tyler. It's top 5s. We got to cut it down.
Right. This is always some tough cuts.
But Wario's Woods is not a tough cut. I told you just the other day. I was kind of just laying in the bed, just trying to not disturb my girl. And I was like, what's in reach of me? I want to play something. My 2DS just so happened to be in reach of me.
Yep.
I wound up booting up the virtual console Wario's Woods, playing that shit for like an hour and a half, dude.
Yep.
I mean, that really says a lot. The NES virtual console release.
Definitely.
And I started up a fresh run, and there's just such a joy to that game. It's a puzzle game, no question, but you're controlling Toad. We all love to control Toad. I mean, ever since you played Super Mario Bros. 2,
Yep.
you love playing as Toad.
Yep.
And you're walking left to right. You can scale the walls even. You have monsters falling of different colors, gems falling of different colors. You're just trying to match bombs as well. That's the big thing. You want to match up these same colored monsters, same colored bombs. And it is the most satisfying, most replayable puzzle game that I can think of, with Tetris being already mentioned prior.
Yep.
I just think Wario's Woods, to me, even though it's a puzzle, to me it feels like such an adventure and such a fleshed out, content heavy game.
Yeah, definitely, man. That's a great pick.
Yeah, and I'm always going to go back to it. That's the thing about it. It's one of the NES games I'm proudest to own. Having it on Virtual Console on every 3DS I have is a comforting feeling.
Yeah, man. Definitely.
And it's also available on Switch Online. Anybody who's got the Switch Online subscription, Wario's Woods is on it. Try it out. See if the magic's there for you. Because if you're anything like me, you'll fall in love with it.
My number one, it's one last puzzle platformer, Sterling.
I'm dying for it, dude. Give it to me.
Portal 2.
Portal 2.
Not now, Portal 1. Portal 2. The game has an incredible amount of content. And it's a game that I feel like, A, I've had this on other top fives before, and B, we've definitely talked about both Portal games at length on this podcast. But it belongs at the top of this list for me because it's the most time I think I've ever put into any one puzzle game that I can think of, certainly on this list. I've pretty much completed that game backwards and forwards multiple times, achievements and everything, that were available at the time. And I think if someone was like, I want a puzzle platformer that has everything, that is what I would give them. It has an incredible, completely separate co-op mode. It has puzzles, like it has a story mode that actually gets you engaged in the actual storytelling and the content of the story, especially if you'd ever played the first Portal. You get the entire backstory behind GLaDOS, behind the entire situation. And just the replay factor is still there because some of the levels have a little bit of open-endedness of how you can do it. There may be one or two intended routes, and then, with Portal, you can kind of build your own, solution in some cases. And I just think that it's an incredible game. Anyone who's never played it, I highly recommend play through the story mode. If you've got a second, play through the co-op. It's so incredibly good.
It's a great pick. I don't think there's any argument as to whether or not Portal's a puzzle game, because it certainly is.
Yeah.
When it comes to Valve content, I feel like I'm such an old head, preferring Half-Life to Half-Life 2, preferring Portal to Portal 2, as controversial as that is, because Portal 2 is incredible. Mm-hmm. But I have so much nostalgia for the first Portal that
it
keeps
stands
my heart
on its own.
Yeah, definitely. But Portal being brought up on the list is so hype because that's a big evolution in puzzle gaming.
Yeah, my first experience with Portal was actually the Portal Flash game, which was also amazing.
Oh, I actually remember that, dude. Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah, that was an amazing game as well. So, love Portal 2, It's still in my Steam. I still want to go back and play it again for the umpteenth time, even after all these years. That's it. Maybe Steam Deck. That might be one of the first games that gets installed.
I'm trying to get Wario's Woods on the Steam Deck, and I think that can happen, actually.
I think it can probably happen.
Let's not get too far into that, but we'll make that happen.
Yeah.